We have some new employees on board this year, so this might be your first winter driving an ambulance. And it would be normal to have some concerns, or at least be looking for some suggestions on how to handle an ambulance in the snow. So that's what this presentation is going to be about. Well, obviously we know who's driving there. Let's back that thing up and take a more careful look at what the advantages and disadvantages are of an ambulance in the snow. If you're super nervous about driving an ambulance in the snow and ice, I get it, and it's not terrible to be cautious. But the truth is, an ambulance can actually be pretty safe in the snow and ice if you understand the vehicle dynamics. I have a four-wheel drive for my personal vehicle, and I am as comfortable in an ambulance as I am in my personal vehicle on a snowy day. You just need to understand the pros and cons of being in an ambulance in the snow. I'm going to give you some data, and if you're one of those people who are really super accurate about data, you'll realize I'm more of a ballparking these numbers. They're not precise to a Lifestar ambulance, but they are pretty accurate. The curb weight of one of our ambulances is around 6,000 pounds, but that only covers the chassis and the cab, the engine and the fluids, and the aluminum box on the back. It doesn't cover any of the rest of the equipment we have on these things. So some might suggest that there's a better measure out there. And that would be the gross vehicle weight rating, which on one of our ambulances is about 11,500 pounds. That covers everything on the ambulance, including what we add to it. All the equipment, the oxygen tanks, the power load, the cot, and all the stuff that we put inside our ambulance. That's the maximum amount of weight that you can put in this ambulance. So our ambulances don't actually weigh 11,500. That's the most they're allowed to weigh. But they are heavy vehicles. The last number I'm going to throw at you is tire contact patch, which is the fancy term for how many square inches of tire are touching the roadway at any given time. Our ambulances have dual rear wheels, which means there are 6 tires touching the roadway at any given time. That calculates to about 220 square inches of tire contact patch. This is where it's easy to get fooled by the ambulance, because when it comes to accelerating, you'll find the ambulance accelerates in snow and ice better than your personal car. And if you're driving that ambulance and you're accelerating and thinking, gee, this is better than my car, this thing is really sticking to the road well, you've forgotten about the gross vehicle weight rating. And when your foot comes off the accelerator and you start touching the brake, you'll find the ambulance is considerably worse than your personal vehicle. And this is what I mean by just understanding the vehicle dynamics. If you remember how much rubber you have on the road and how well you can accelerate, but how important it is to compensate for that heavy weight, you're going to do just fine driving this ambulance in the snow. You just need to understand what you're doing. One topic of particular interest is black ice. Black ice is a very thin layer of ice that forms on the roadway that is more or less invisible to most people. It's called black ice because the color of the roadway shows right through it, and it's not something you can easily see. However, experienced drivers can notice a difference in how reflective the road surface is. Basically, if the road is shiny, but it's too cold for it to be truly wet, it's probably black ice. It's particularly dangerous because you're literally driving on a sheet of ice with no roadway coming through, so you have little to no traction at all. Here's a roadway that has black ice on it, and you can see how slippery it is. And this next car comes along and doesn't get the clue that there's a car in the ditch already and continues driving, and you notice the wheels aren't turning at all and the car is still moving at full speed. This is very dangerous black ice. Here's a truck. You notice the rear wheels are not turning at all. I also notice he's not spreading any salt to fix the problem. But there is no traction at all, and the vehicle just keeps moving. Later in the same day, another truck comes along and experiences the same thing. He's losing traction here, and at some point he realizes he needs to put that blade down for some more stability and to try and slow himself down, but it's still not having a lot of effect. Look at that surface of the road. See how shiny it is? This guy's driving way too fast considering the amount of ice that's on the roadway. And here's somebody who's figured out how to drive safely. He got the flashers on, he's going very, very slowly, and he's maintaining control of the vehicle, as opposed to this guy who's going full speed through, and you'll see he fishtails around the corner. So black ice is very slippery, you have little to no traction, and you need to see the warning signs. So where does it come from? Anywhere that ice or snow would be melting and then refreezing, you have a risk of black ice. So bridges and overpasses, because the cold air can pass below these things and can cool the surface of the bridge down much more quickly than if it were on normal ground. Shaded areas that the sun isn't hitting are risky for black ice. And if you're driving on a very cold day below freezing and there is moisture in the air like a mist or a fog, that is a warning sign for possible black ice. And if there's a light rain or snow, a drizzle, where the roadway is cold but the air is a little bit warmer, so the moisture can come down in the warmer air, but as soon as it hits that cold roadway it freezes, that's a risk factor for black ice as well. Another place that black ice forms that people don't think about is at intersections, particularly lesser used intersections. The busier ones, not only are they more frequently salted, but the busier ones, there isn't an opportunity for this to happen. But you'll notice as traffic comes and waits for the light, the engine heat is melting the snow and ice underneath these vehicles, and then when they take off, the cold air hits it and it starts to freeze again. So you come along in your ambulance and you hit that ice patch that you didn't even know was there. This is particularly true in intersections out in the countryside as opposed to in the city where there's much more traffic. So what are the winter driving tips that we can offer in order to keep things safe out there? If you have snow and ice conditions, you have to increase your following distance. You already have a very heavy vehicle. Your following distance should already be quite a bit more than in an average passenger vehicle, but when the snow and ice hit the ground, you need to increase that following distance even more. You also have to remember that just because you loaded the patient in the back with your partner and now you're walking around to the driver's side door, your job isn't done. As a driver, your job is just beginning. You should be constantly scanning the area around the ambulance and making decisions all the time about speed, which lane you should be in, and when and how you should be using your brakes. You should be keeping an internal dialogue in your head going, thinking about everything that's happening. That means you're anticipating what others might do in front of you, you're anticipating risks and hazards, and you're constantly reevaluating things. You might remember this little tidbit from orientation or your CIVO class. I've thrown a couple extra things in just for fun.
The distance you should scan ahead of your ambulance varies according to the driving environment. For example, on an open roadway, such as this, you should scan down the road 12 to 15 seconds, or about a quarter of a mile. Scanning this far ahead will give you an early warning of potential hazards, giving you time and space to slow, change lanes, or stop safely if necessary. Here, your scan alerts you to a toll area well in advance, giving you plenty of time to signal, and when safe, change lanes into the proper lane. Whether operating in emergency or non-emergency mode, this scanning technique must be used to spot potential hazards. If you find that you are often surprised by traffic conditions, it is probably a good indication that you are not scanning effectively. In more congested, low-speed areas, such as this, your 12 to 15-second scan translates into about a block to a block and a half ahead. In this case, you should check the traffic light ahead and scan through the intersection into the next block. Scanning properly in this situation would have alerted you to this van making a turn into your lane and this vehicle entering from a side parking lot. And further ahead, these brake lights alert you to a crosswalk and a crossing pedestrian. Scanning down the road a block to a block and a half gave you plenty of time and distance to slow gradually, stopping behind this vehicle to allow the pedestrian to cross safely. The most important technique to keep the cushion in front of your vehicle free of other vehicles is trying to maintain a safe following distance behind the vehicle directly in front. A safe following distance gives you the space to recognize and react safely to hazards in time to prevent a collision or an emergency maneuver. Should the vehicle in front of you stop or slow abruptly for any reason, you will be able to react appropriately in time.
So even though those driving videos can be a little on the dry side, the truth is they give you some really solid advice, which is to constantly be scanning and reevaluating the environment that you're driving in and constantly making new decisions about how to operate that ambulance. Try to remember that driving an ambulance in snow and ice is an active task. It's not a passive task. Just because you drive your personal vehicle every day and you don't have to think very much about it doesn't mean the same is true when it comes to driving an ambulance, particularly in bad weather. When you're driving an ambulance in bad weather, you are actively making decisions all the time. And avoid distractions. This is not the time to be searching for your favorite song on your phone. This is not the time to be changing the radio, and you shouldn't be on the cell phone at all. If you hear the cell phone go off, even if it's dispatch, you can get on the radio, which does not require you to take your eyes off the road, and you can also wait until you're at your destination before you pick up the phone and have that conversation. Remember that your first responsibility is to make sure that you, your partner, and your patient get where you're going safely. Thanks for paying attention. I appreciate it, and I'll see you on the next training.